We're going to talk about how to create reports in Primero. First thing you're going to want to do is find this little icon in the navigation bar. It looks like a bar graph. And if you click on it, you'll come to this page here. This is the reports page. And you can see here all of the default reports. Now, you can't really delete these or edit these because we always want these to be available for admins, but you can create your own reports. So I'm going to go over here to this Create Report button and click on it. Now, obviously, the first thing that you're going to do is give your report a name. What we want to start out with is a report that tells our admins about the average age for children being registered and also which agencies are registering them. So I'm just going to say cases by age and agency. So you can also add a description, and we're just going to skip it for now because it's really not that important. It'll show up later if you do add something. When we go to select a module, you'll see right now I have these two options here. I have CP for child protection and GB, gender-based violence. In reality, you will probably only have access to one of these. So if you are working on a CP implementation, you'll only have the CP option. If you're working on a GBV implementation, you'll only have the GBV option. I'm going to select CP for right now. Once we selected a module, we can select a record type. And when we do this, you can see that we have our standard record types in Primero. We have case, we have an incident, we have a tracing request. You're also going to see down here, we also can report on a protection concern, a service, or a follow-up. Now, the way that works is these correspond to subforms that we have on the case forms. So if your implementation has that protection concern detail subform, you can run a report on the protection concern detail subforms themselves. And that can give you more information about specific protection concerns and how those vary between children. Same thing for services and follow-ups. You can see how long it's taking services to get implemented, for instance, or what percentage of services have been implemented. For right now, we're just going to select case. And on the row, let's put the agency. I can select this, and for column, I'm going to put age. Now, I want to do that again really quickly. If I type AG, you can see that it slowly limits down. It narrows down the fields I can choose from. The rest of these options we're going to leave alone for right now. The one thing I will just say to pay attention to, because we're going to talk about this later, is that I have not added any filters. There's this little checkbox down here that says, include default filters. And the checkbox label says open and valid. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But for right now, I'm just going to save this report. And you can see that I automatically taken to this page. That's just this table that has all the information from my report. And you can see that UNICEF has the most cases in this system. And you can see which ages they have. Now, this report is a little hard to look at because we have a lot of different ages that a child can have. One way that we can simplify that is by using age ranges. And to do that, I'm going to click Edit. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to select this Use Age Ranges tick box right here. If I save, you'll see that I have a lot less columns and it becomes a lot easier to look at this report. I can tell roughly how many children I have in each age range, and I can see that most of the children I'm registering are teenagers, really. One other thing that would be helpful is if we could represent this data in a graph, which is something that Primero allows you to do. If I edit the report and I scroll down, you are going to see this tick box that says generate a graph. So if I click this, you can see that I have this extra tab here, and if I click on it, all of this information is represented in a bar graph. Now, one of the other things that you can do with the reports in Primero is you can export them so that you have them offline. If you click Data, you get this table here. It's going to download a CSV file. And this is the exact same information we saw in the report. So if you want to run your own graph or create your own graph out of this data, you can in Excel, since we know that Excel gives you a lot of flexibility with that. Same thing, if I go to export the graph, I will get this image file, and it gives me the exact same graph that I have on the website. So right now I'm logged in as a super user, which most people won't have. But we know that a lot of times managers and agency administrators are the ones using the reports. So very quickly, I'm going to log out from here. Actually, I'm going to open another window where I can log in. I'm going to log in as somebody who manages an agency. In this case, I'm going to log in as an agency focal point who's managing the UNICEF agency. So when I log in, I can go to the Reports tab up here, just like we were talking about before. If I scroll down to Cases by Age and Agency, which is a report we just created, you can see that I actually don't necessarily see all the data for all the other agencies. You can see these are all zeros. Now, one question we get a lot of times is, okay, but if I only want to see UNICEF's data, which this agency focal point, the role is configured to only see data in reports that is relevant to that agency. If I only want to see information for my agency, why am I seeing all these rows with other agencies' information and it just says 0? There is a way to prevent that, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to switch windows. You'll notice here I'm logged in as the focal point, and I'm going to switch back to where I'm logged in as a super user. I'm going to edit this report. And the way that I get rid of all those 0 rows is by clicking this checkbox that says do not display empty rows. And then I'm going to save. Now, if I go back into my other window where I'm logged in as this focal point user, I'm going to reload this report after I made that change, and you can see all those 0 rows disappeared. And now I only have 2 rows. This one says UNICEF, and you can see there's a lot of cases for UNICEF. And you may still be wondering, why do I have this case for Save the Children if this user belongs to UNICEF and is only supposed to see their own agency's cases? The reason that might be happening is you will see information in your reports. If you're only supposed to be seeing information that is relevant to your agency or the user groups that your user is part of, you will still see information, for instance, about a case that has been referred to one of your agency's users. If you want to create a report that is specifically for a specific agency, you can do that, and we'll talk about how to do that later. But if you are just logged in as a user whose role is configured to see information on the cases in their user groups, you'll still see cases that have been referred to your users from other agencies. So I'm going to go back in here where we're logged in as a super user. So just letting everybody know that that's what we're doing. What we're going to do is we're going to edit this report to make it a little more complicated. So what I want to do is, first of all, I want to show you that you can put more than one attribute on the rows or on the columns. So you can make this a really multifaceted report. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in risk level. And here, I'm going to add a field that is a little bit odd. It's size of family. And obviously, if you were creating a report in real life, this probably wouldn't be that relevant. But this is going to help us illustrate some of the features that these reports have. So if I save this report, you can see that this report got a little more complicated. So here we have our age ranges, but under each age range, we also have it broken down by the risk level. And you can see that here, this is the total cases in this age range, and then it'll get broken down by risk level. So for instance, here for 12 to 17, you can see there is one case total that has a family size of 6 in the acted agency. And you can also see that there's one high-risk case in that category. So like I said, this is a very complicated report and probably would not be useful, but this does help illustrate some of the features we have. And the next one I want to show you is specifically having to do with this family size attribute. So obviously not a lot of people in this test system have filled out that field. Somebody apparently has a family with 123 members, good for them. But you can see that here when it shows up in the table, we only get a 1 number because there's one child with that many family members. Our reports have a feature that allow you to instead count, in this case, the number of family members, and then to add up all of those family members. I'm going to show you how that works. If I edit this case and I scroll down, you're going to see a field that says aggregate counts from. Here I can select from all of the number fields that are present on the case forms. And so specifically, I'm going to choose size of family. And then I'm going to save. Now when I come back here, if you see, remember that that one child that had 123 members of their family? Here, instead of showing a 1 here, we show 123. And you can see that in our total for UNICEF, going right across this row here, you can see we have this number, 143 as a total, and that's because we are adding up the 8, an 8 that occurs here, a 12 that occurs here, and the 123 that occurs here. And that gives us our total number. That essentially tells you how many family members how many people have a family member that is being cared for in the Primero system. This isn't often useful in child protection context, but it's still a feature that we have available. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of that family size attribute because it does make things a little bit complicated to look at, and I'm going to get rid of that aggregate counts from attribute. And now what I want to talk about is this report filters function. Now remember earlier I was saying that I wanted you to remember that we didn't add any filters when we first created this report. What we're going to do, I'm going to save this and show you the numbers in the report, and then we're going to go back, edit it again, and add a filter. So if I save this, I go in here, you can see that we don't have a lot of cases in the system, but we still have a decent number overall. If I edit this, I can add a filter to make it so that we're really limiting the number of cases we've seen. So what the filter that I'm going to add is I want to see all the cases that have been transferred, I'm going to say in the last 3 months. Now, if you see what I just did there, I selected this reassigned transferred on attribute, which is the date the case has been transferred. And once I do that, my options here you get 4 options here. The first one is that the form value is not blank. So that would essentially say the child has been transferred at some point. You can also say that the child was transferred exactly on this date. That's what the equal sign would mean. If you choose the less than sign, that would be saying the child was transferred before this date. And if you choose this one, it essentially says that the child was transferred after this date. So we're going to do this one. We're going to say children that were transferred after May 1st. So I chose the greater than symbol, and then here I select a date. If I save this, you can see that the numbers in this table drop significantly because this is only counting the children that have been transferred to another caseworker or to another agency since May 1st. And you can see previously, I believe this number was about 160 something, and now it's down to 2 because there aren't that many children in this test system that have been transferred recently. So the reason that I had you remember that we didn't really add any filters before is because there's a checkbox when you were first creating a report that says add default filters. And that's these ones right here. You can see that we didn't add these filters but they got added automatically onto the report. So these default filters essentially say that we only want to look at cases that are open and cases that are valid. So you might be asking, what does valid mean? A valid record is a case that has not been disabled. And so this is any case that we are actually using in the system and then we haven't sort of disabled because it was an error, or the case was entered in error or something like that. Now, if you want to see cases that are closed, you can get rid of this filter. So I just removed that open cases filter, and if I save this now, we probably won't get too many more cases in our table, but the numbers will change because it'll now also be counting, it'll now be counting closed cases. I don't think that changed it too much. If we go, let's get rid of the other filter we had for transferred cases. If we get rid of that and save, now you can see that before this number, I believe, was 166, now it's 167. So we are now counting all of our closed cases in here. So if we go back into the report, I want to show you one or two more features. There's this one dropdown that we didn't really talk about, talking about what date ranges we use. And the way we can illustrate this is, instead of having the age and risk level attributes in this column, we can break down cases by when they were registered. So you can see if I type in date of registration, I can select this. And if I leave this on day and save, I'm going to have a massive report. It's going to have a lot of registration dates in it because this is every single time, every day on which a case was registered will be represented in the system. That's really hard to read. What I can do instead, if I edit this report, if I modify it to use month, for instance, we'll have a much simpler report. And now you can see this is just broken down by which month the case was registered. You can also do that by week, you can do it by year. Usually month makes the most sense for most reports.
I want to show you how to do one last thing with the reports. We want to talk about how to report on a subform. And it's very similar to normal reporting. We're just going to click the Create Report button again. And what I want to do is we're going to start out, we're going to do a report on the services subform. And so I'm just going to call this Report on Services. And here, I'm just going to say we're reporting. I type. And risk level. So we're going to see what types of services are being provided and for which risk levels for the child. So once again, I'm just going to select the CP module. For record type this time, instead of selecting case, I'm going to select service. And what you're going to see when I go to select my attributes for the rows and the columns is you're going to see I can choose from both fields that are on the subform and fields that are on the case itself. So for the rows, I'm going to do the type of service that's being provided. And in this implementation, we call that field services requested or required. Then in the column, instead of reporting on a field that is in the subform, I can also just report on something that's on the case itself. So once again, just like we did in the other report, I can select risk level. And that's about as complicated as we're going to make it. So I just want to show you how this works. If we save, now you can see we've got this table that shows us in the rows all these different types of services, and in the columns shows us the risk levels of the children who are receiving those services.
Earlier, we logged in as a user who could see reports, but we talked about how they could only see information in the reports that was relevant to the cases that were managed by the users in their agency. To show you how we do that, I'm going to take you to the configuration for the role that that user has.
It's a role called the focal point. So once again, in this particular configuration, we have these focal point users that are responsible for a lot of the administration at the agency level. So you can see here, I'm editing this role, and I'm going to scroll down to the reports permissions. It's a very long page, so I'm going to scroll for a little while to get to the reports configuration. But you can see that when we get here, we've got 5 permission options. We've got administrator read, we've got group read, we've got create, we've got write, and we've got manage. What this all really means, I'll go one by one. Administrator read means that a user with this role will be able to see reports that contain information about all of the cases in the system. Now here you can see that instead we have the second option checked. This is the group read permission. What this means is that when a user with this role goes and looks at the reports, they will only see numbers that reflect the cases or incidents or tracing requests that their agency's users manage. But more specifically, technically, it is the users in that administrator's user groups. So for instance, that user that we logged in earlier was an administrator for an agency, and that agency may have 10 user groups, which are just teams of caseworkers in maybe 10 refugee camps, for instance. If that agency administrator is in each one of those 10 user groups and they go to the reports, the numbers they see in the reports will reflect the records that are managed by the users in those 10 user groups, in those 10 separate refugee camps. So that is how you use the report permission to limit the information that an agency administrator is seeing. Now, just to really quickly go through these other permissions, since we are talking about reports in general, the create permission is exactly what it sounds like. If the role has this create checkbox checked, it means that a user with this role can create reports. Write means that they can edit existing reports. And so you can see that because this role only has the group read checkbox checked, these agency administrators aren't going to be able to create or edit reports. They're only going to be able to see reports, and they're only going to be able to see reports, like I said, with information that is relevant to the records that are managed in their agency. And finally, we have this manage permission, which if you have watched any of the videos on role configuration, you'll know that that means all of the above. It means all of these permissions put together. However, I will say that if you check manage and you check group read, it will cut out this administrator read permission. So you can give a user access to all of the permissions for a report, but then say, when you're looking at this report, you'll still only see information that's relevant to the records in your user groups.